Instead, I want to get to the big one in the SEC West, Alabama at Texas A&M. And this was a game, look, I thought it was a fascinating moment in time for both of these programs, both for the on the field and off the field ramifications. On the field, it goes without saying. These two teams both control their own destiny in the SEC West, only two teams in the West without a conference loss. So whoever wins this game has the easiest path to Atlanta going forward and controls their own destiny. But beyond that, I thought it was an interesting moment in time for Texas A&M. This is a program that has been doubted and been ridiculed and made fun of. And it felt like for the first time in years, there was some real positive momentum going into this game. You dominate two straight SEC opponents to open up league play. You have the talent. The Bobby Petrino hire is working. The offense is rolling. The defense is getting after people. One of the best defensive fronts in college football. Nick Saban is raving all week long about the talent at Texas A&M. And it led to a situation where you add the Texas A&M perspective with the Alabama perspective. Have they really figured out the quarterback situation? Can you really win big games with Jalen Milroe? It was a situation where everybody in the media felt like, okay, we're getting behind this Texas A&M team. They might be actually onto something here. And so I bring it up because it felt like a fascinating moment in time. Texas A&M is finally about to get a little bit of national credit. And instead, the exact opposite happens, and Alabama does what they've done to so many SEC teams in big SEC games over the last couple of years. They go to College Station and beat Texas A&M, final score 26-20. And I want to break down the game, but as I often say, I want to look at both sides of it. But as big as it was for Alabama, to me, it felt much, much, much bigger for Texas A&M. And let me say this. This felt like the game where any person left that hadn't completely given up on Jimbo Fisher, it felt like everybody was like, you know what? I'm officially out on Jimbo. Fair or not, this is just the reality of that game. And I say fair or not because, listen, it's not only Jimbo Fisher's fault that Texas A&M lost this game. I thought Max Johnson did not play well, held on to the ball way too much, did not get rid of the ball, whatever. I didn't think Bobby Petrino had a great game, didn't get the ball in his playmakers' hands. Evan Stewart was quiet, whatever. And part of that's, of course, Alabama's, great scheming on their own right. So I'm not trying to discredit Alabama. Texas A&M's defense could not stop Jermaine Burton. So it wasn't on Jimbo Fisher. But at the end of the day, there's only one guy in College Station in that building that is paid $9 million a year to win football games at the highest level. They're all responsible for it, but Jimbo Fisher is the only one that gets paid $9 million to do it. And the disappointing part about Saturday is that Jimbo Fisher, the $9 million man, the guy that was brought to College Station to elevate this program, to compete for national championships, I thought he looked scared and bluntly a little bit confused late in that game. Two things really stand out, almost like what we just talked about with Texas, Oklahoma. The first one, the very controversial punt late in the third quarter. Anybody who watched the game knows what I'm talking about, but for those who don't, Texas A&M had been in control for the early part of the first half into halftime, early part of the second half. They have a 17-10 lead. Alabama ties it at 17-17. Texas A&M has the ball late in the third quarter, and they cross over the 50 into Alabama territory at the Alabama 45. Gets down to 4th and 1. You can feel the tension in the stadium. Are they going to go for it? Are they not? Jimbo Fisher elects to punt. Punts the ball back to Alabama. Alabama scores on the next possession. All of a sudden, it is 24-17. Texas A&M never has the lead again, never has a tie again, and loses all momentum. And again, it felt like in that moment, you could feel the tension in the stadium as far as, is he going to go for it? Is he not? Should he not? Beyond that, there was the final possession of the game, which was a complete disaster. And if you watch the game, you know what I'm talking about. But you're down 9 points. And by the way, you're lucky to only be down 9, but it is still a 2-possession game. Late in the game, under 2 minutes, you get into the red zone. Ainias Smith is like this close to scoring, but he doesn't get it, and you have to regroup. From there, chaos basically ensues. You have a touchdown call back because of a hold. Then, knowing you need 2 scores, it gets to 4th down. You end up calling a timeout only to kick a field goal. And so you waste a bunch of time. Then you burn a timeout only to kick a field goal when obviously any well-prepared, well-coached team is going to say, hey, if we don't get it on third, get the field goal team out there. Or if we don't get it on third, we're going to use a timeout and go for a touchdown anyway. Matter of fact, you could have argued that after the third down play, they should have tried to kick the field goal to save time and save timeouts. They don't. They get 3. Then on top of that, they don't even have to kick the ball on sides. They choose to, and they never get the ball back. That is how they ended up losing the game. By the way, Alabama, Tommy Rees called a pass play on first down, which if he doesn't call that pass play, Alabama, completely runs out the clock. There was one final play where it looked like A&M could get the ball back, whatever. So you have the non-punt, you have the chaos in the red zone, you have the decision to kick the field goal, you have the burn timeout. And it just speaks to exactly what I just said. I don't know where Texas A&M fans go from here with Jimbo Fisher. And bluntly, it feels like he lost every piece of support that he had left. Because at the end of the day, I think what stands out to me, and listen, I'm not an A&M fan. I know people are like, oh, you talk about A&M a lot. I talk about A&M a lot because they're fascinating. But at the same time, what stands out about that situation to me is a couple things. One, I just thought Jimbo Fisher coached scared, right? Again, it's what we talked about, what I just mentioned in the lead up to this game. You're at home. All those young guys are starting to turn into men. You got guys like Anaya Smith who came back for this season specifically. And you coach scared, right? And it's not like it's year 1. It's not like it's year 2. It's not like you're trying to survive to beat Alabama. You beat Alabama 2 years ago. You maybe should have beat them last year in Tuscaloosa. This isn't about proving that you can beat them. This is about going out and taking the win because you want to show America that you're not afraid of them and that you are the best team in the SEC. And so to coach scared, to coach not to win, to punt that football, give the ball back, and then never get a lead back, to mess up time after time, it's just a complete disaster. And I think the most frustrating thing for Texas A&M fans, besides what I just talked about, besides the fact that, as I said, it changes everything, but more than that, you can't trust your coach. That is probably the most frustrating thing, right? And I tweeted this out, and I think some people misconstrued it as a shot at Bama. To be clear, Bama was the better team. Bama deserved to win. But Jimbo Fisher did himself no favors. And so it's just so frustrating because when you're a football fan or a basketball fan or baseball fan or whatever, if you just lose because the other team is simply better and you don't have the dudes, that's a tough pill to swallow, but you sleep better at night than knowing we do have the dudes. They just weren't put in the best position by the guy that's paid $9 million a year to get the job done. And so what's fascinating to me about this game, it completely changes everything for Texas A&M. I'm not smart enough to know if Jimbo Fisher can survive or will survive or is the money there or whatever. But think about the two worlds, the two concurrent worlds, if you will, that could have been Saturday if you win versus now that you lost. If you win, by Monday, you're probably in the top 10, maybe 15, but you completely control the SEC West. You beat Alabama, and you look at the rest of the SEC and you say, wait a second now, LSU can't stop anybody. Ole Miss is kind of up and down. We play Tennessee next week, but we can beat them. And you feel like, man, there's a pathway to Atlanta. And by the way, even if we lose one of these games, maybe we don't make the playoff, but remember, we have the 2-game cushion on Alabama. And so because of it, we are in great shape to get to Atlanta for our first SEC championship game. And now we can build something for 2023 when all these young guys are now juniors and draft eligible. Instead, you lose. And I got to be blunt. I don't know what the future of this season is for Texas A&M. Because all of a sudden you lose that game in the manner that you did at home. Now it calls everything into question. You got to go to Tennessee next week. Tennessee is far from perfect, but they're coming off a bye. Outside of the Florida game, they have played well, especially at home. I don't know how you can sit there and feel good about that game. Ole Miss is always giving Texas A&M trouble. Now you got to go there. Lane Kiffin, scheme up. We know Lane Kiffin doesn't like Jimbo Fisher. We know Lane Kiffin likes to poke at Jimbo Fisher. We know Lane Kiffin likes to do whatever he can to kind of embarrass Jimbo Fisher, for lack of a better term. You think it's going to be easy there? LSU is not going to be a cakewalk. And so again, I don't know if today's like will Jimbo survive the season? What I do know is this. That game next week in Knoxville, I think it's probably the biggest game of his career, because biggest game at Texas A&M, because if you don't win that game, then all of a sudden you start to look around and say, wait a second now, you're sitting at 4-3 coming out of that game, and you can't have the season that you wanted to have. What you really wanted this year was to be 9-3, 10-2, and build some momentum for next year where maybe you have a chance to compete for a national championship. That's how I feel. Maybe an A&M fan would disagree. You lose that game, you're 4-3. You still have at Ole Miss, at LSU, and you're looking at 7-5, whatever, 8-4. And so to me, I'm not smart enough to know if the money has been raised or can you get the money to buy out Jimbo Fisher. But I just know that everything changed on Saturday, and it is not good for Texas A&M. And I think the bottom line that needs to be said is, I don't know how you can feel good about Jimbo Fisher going forward. He wasn't the only reason that you lost that game, but he was the biggest one. And I don't know how you can't be disappointed.